This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rada back again with episode 50 of A Geek Leader. And today we have one of my favorite authors, Todd Henry, and we're going to be talking about his book, Herding Tigers, which is subtitled, Be the Leader That Creative People Need. This was probably one of my favorite books of 2018 so far. And I listened to the audiobook first, and I had to go out and buy the actual hard copy after that because there's so many things in there that I would bookmark through Audible that I wanted to go back and highlight and reread and think about some more. And there's a section at the end of every chapter that goes into actions and rituals and conversations that you can have with your team to help you be a better leader. And at the very end of the book, it's probably my favorite part, there's a section that just goes through all the different rituals that you have to do weekly, monthly, or quarterly with your team to help make your team a better team and help be a better leader, which I just absolutely loved. This talk with Todd is really good. We talk about all the basics that are in the book. We talk about how to fight fair. We talk about the transition from maker to mentor. And overall, it's just a really, really, really good interview and good talk. And before we get into that, I want you guys to take just a minute and head over to iTunes. If you're looking at this or listening to this in a podcast, just go over and give a rating and a review of the show. That would be awesome, either in Google Play or Stitcher, Spotify, podcast, wherever you're listening to this, and a review and a rating would be awesome and much appreciated. So for now, that's it. Let's take a listen to this talk we had with Todd Henry, and hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. And we're live. I've got Todd Henry on with me, and he's the author of The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, Louder Than Words, and his newest book, Herding Tigers. How are you doing, Todd?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
So why did you decide to write a leadership book, I guess targeting the creative leaders when I guess your books kind of in the past have been more about the creative professional?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think a lot of people, as they advance in their career, they ask different questions. And at the beginning of their career, I think people are asking, am I capable? How do I organize my life so that I can bring my best effort to the table every day? They're facing all kinds of pressures to have to be creative on demand. And so it really is about self-preservation and self-organization so that they're bringing good work to the table. And I think once they begin to answer that question, yes, I'm capable and I am actually producing good work. I think the question they begin asking is, am I producing quality work? Am I producing the work that I'm capable of producing? Am I doing the right work? And that's really what my book Die Empty was to address was, listen, you're producing a lot of work, but are you doing the work that really matters? And are you really producing the work that you're capable of producing and building a body of work you can be proud of? And then I think as people begin doing that, they begin asking different questions like, is my work uniquely reflective of who I am? Which is what my third book was designed to do, to help you discover your voice. It's louder than words. How do you develop your voice and have a unique and compelling message through the work that you do? And then the one thing I kept hearing, John, from people is, this is all great and this is all working really well for me, but I am responsible for a group of other people who have to lead the creative process or who have to engage in the creative process. And how do I help them be positioned to be able to bring the best of who they are to what they do every day? How do I lead them through the same process that I've gone through in organizing my own life and my own work? And unfortunately, as you probably know and as I have discovered, people who are leading teams of creative people often have to kind of learn on the job. And often they learn by whatever experiences they've had in the past. So if they've had really great leadership, then congratulations, you won the leadership lottery, and hopefully you're going to have the skills you need to be able to lead other people. But if you maybe had less than stellar leadership in your own experience, then you're just kind of trying to learn from what you've experienced before. There's no real sort of on-the-job training for leading creative teams. So I wanted to help people understand what are the dynamics of collaborative creativity and what is it that highly creative, productive, talented people need from their leadership in order to be able to produce their best work. And so I've been hearing those requests for years. And finally, I thought, it's probably time to just write the book about how to lead teams of creative people, or at least to give them what they need in order to be able to produce their best work.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I know my transition into leadership and management, it was one of those scenarios where, oh, you're really good at developing, you're really good at writing code, you're really good at building software. Let's put you in charge of the people that do those things. And
right.
It's okay. And I remember before I gave my first one-on-one, I had never had a one-on-one. So I wasn't even sure how to do that. And that's one of the things I really like about this book is you have these checkpoints at the end. And, they give you actions and conversations and rituals to follow as you're, doing these processes and learning these tasks. And I think that's an important aspect because I found that a lot of leadership books kind of fall into two categories. Either they're super practical and they're just like, here are the step-by-step things, but not so much of the why and the theory behind it. Or there's ones that are so theoretical that you read it and you're like, wow, that's really good, but I don't know how to even start. And I think this is a really good mixture of those two elements.
Oh, thank you. Well, to go back to something you just said, isn't that the craziest thing in the world? Because that's such a common story. People are really great at what they do. So they're a designer, they're a writer, they're a coder, they're an engineer, something like that. And so somebody comes along and says, you know what, you're really good at doing that. Why don't we put you in charge of other people who are doing that? Well, leading the work and doing the work are fundamentally different things, and they're fundamentally different skill sets. Not everyone who is great at doing the work is wired to lead the work, at least not naturally. So, we have to, as people who are responsible for organizations, we have to begin to think differently also about who we put in those leadership positions, and not just think that because someone's great at doing the work, they're naturally going to be great at leading the work. Because when you're leading the work, you have to separate yourself from the work. You can't do the work. Instead, you're responsible for the people who are doing the work, which is a totally different skill set from actually engaging in the technical work necessary to deliver value.
Yeah, and it's a tough one to learn too, because I know for me it was so difficult to step back and let other people do the work. When I thought sometimes I could do that better than them, but that doesn't scale.
That's right. And when you do the work of your team, this is one of the early chapters of Herding Tigers, but when you make the transition from maker to manager, when you do the work of your team's capacity never scales beyond you. Now, that's a great way to get results in the short term because you can control all of the work and make sure it's exactly what it needs to be. But in the long term, that's going to mean that your team is never going to engage in anything without first coming to you and seeking your opinion, which means that there's never going to be any work done on your team that is beyond your personal and direct involvement, which means the work of the team is never going to scale beyond you. So that is a terrible way to develop and grow a team, and it's a terrible way to develop and grow a company. Eventually, your team's effectiveness will shrink to the size of your direct involvement.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult to take vacations as well.
It does. Well, and also, as a side note to that, you're not going to keep talented people around for very long. Talented people want a combination of stability and challenge. When you are directly controlling the work, you're giving them lots of stability because you're basically coming in and telling them what to do, but they're not going to feel challenged. They're not going to feel like they have permission and freedom to take risks and try things and experiment and solve problems. So highly talented people are eventually going to move on. They're not going to stick around if they feel like you're constantly stepping in and overriding their decisions or trying to control their work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Autonomy is so important when it comes to motivating and keeping those highly skilled people engaged in the job that they're doing.
Yes.
One of the things I really liked about that same chapter you were just talking about, because I guess when I was first becoming a leader and starting to really focus on how do I manage people and taking that step back away from the technical side of things, I kind of thought I need to stop doing all technical stuff all the time. But you talked about, no, you still need to be involved a little bit. You still need to do things, but you don't need to do other people's work. Can you talk a little bit about that concept?
Yeah. So this is also a real unique challenge for people as well. You do need to be somewhat involved in the doing of the work in order to maintain your credibility. So there's a balance, right? It's not just I'm going to float on high and just lead all of you people as you try to go about doing. No, you do have to stay rooted in the work, and that's a matter of credibility. It's also a matter of you making sure you keep your technical chops up. Whatever your particular area of whatever your particular skill area is, you need to make sure that you keep your technical chops up so that you can speak meaningfully and credibly about the work as your team is doing the work. Most of us, John, fall not into a pure maker or a pure manager role. We fall into what's been called a makeager type of role, where we're not only managing, but we also have some responsibility for making. And that's fine and that's great. The question that I have for people is not, are you doing any of the work? The question is, are you doing all of the work, right? Are you stepping in all the time, overriding decisions and inserting yourself where you don't need to be inserted in the process? Because if so, that probably speaks not to your desire for the team to do its best work, but to your own personal insecurity about how a lack of quality work will speak about you and speak about your leadership. And in order to countermand that insecurity, the solution isn't to step in and force the work to be the way it needs to be. The solution is to develop your team to be able to make decisions on their own that reflect the quality of work that you want. But that's a longer process. It takes more time, which is why most people opt for the quicker route, which is just to step in and control.
Mm-hmm. I know that's exactly what I did when I first became a manager. Is I stepped in and tried to control everything, and I found myself working 60, 70 hours a week sometimes in order to get everything done and to have that level of quality that I thought was necessary. And I think one of the things that I had to learn was, in order for the quality was going to be capped at whatever my skill set was, and some people can do better quality than me, and I needed to step back and give them that opportunity.
Right. Yeah, and that takes self-awareness as a leader, which means you need other people around you to help you identify that, right? Like, if your goal as a leader should be to get the people on your team to a point where they're making better decisions than you could have made in their shoes, in their situation, right? You want your team to be better than you, because if that happens, then that relieves a lot of pressure on you. You can step back and begin thinking about where you're going, not where you are. And that's your job. Again, that's your job as a leader, as a manager. And a lot of people say, well, that's, the manager is the person who just directly, and the leader is the person who, I don't like to parse those terms, because I think regardless of your job, if you're managing, you are also leading. You are also making strategic decisions about vision and culture and all of these things. Like, you have to define those things even if you're a manager. So I don't like it when people parse manager and leader as if they're these utterly distinct things. I don't think that they are. I think that all managers are leaders and all leaders have to manage. So I think that we have to be really careful as managers / leaders to make sure that we are developing our team to be better than we are capable of being. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to produce better work. And at the end of the day, then it's going to reflect back on us as a leader if we do that job effectively.
No, I think that's a good point. I know my wife is actually a project manager, and we were talking about some of the skills that it takes to be a good project manager. And we got onto the track about leadership, and it's like, they never teach you about leadership when it comes to project manager. They give you like here's how you do a Scrum project, here's how you do, whatever, different methodologies. Right. But leadership plays so much into that. You're not going to be a good project manager if you don't also have those leadership skills, and vice versa.
Oh, absolutely. No question. And a big chunk of that is honing your intuition to be able to recognize patterns, being able to stay ahead of problems, and understanding. You don't have to know what's 3 miles up the road, but you have to know what's half a mile up the road for your team. And in order to do that, you need to be able to step back and begin to synthesize and look at patterns. That's what your team really needs you to do as a leader, not to be directly involved in the day-to-day details of the work. Yeah,
I think that's really well said. I know one of the things when you're talking about seeing up the road, I like to think of it like you're on a train track, and if you're small on that train track, let's say an individual contributor, you're looking down at your feet, you're looking at what each step that you're taking. But if you're a little bit taller than that person, like maybe you're the manager of that team or the leader of that team, you need to look just over that person's head and look just in front of where they're stepping, not where you're stepping. And then if you're the director, you have to look over a little bit further and a little bit further out until you're running the company, and maybe you're looking 5 years out.
Right. And like you said, if you're the director, you're also listening for the train, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's not the rank and file's person's job to be listening for the train necessarily, but somebody has to be listening for the train. So I think that's a really, really good way of thinking about it.
In your book, you have a whole chapter just on fighting well. And I know some leaders and managers don't like their teams to fight at all. They don't want any conflict. They want it to be nice and smooth and everybody happy. And, there's one paragraph in here that I just want to read real quick about family. And I'll, qualify this just a little bit and tell you that I've had some disagreements on this with people on my team where they say, oh, we need to be more like a family. And you actually said in here, this is why I shudder, or let me say, quote, this is why I shudder when I hear a leader refer to a team or company culture as a family. No, you are not a family. Families are connected by blood or by bonds that cannot be broken, and membership in a family is unconditional. However, membership in your organization requires an adoption of certain set of behaviors and a subscription to cultural ideals and norms. And if at any point someone violates those norms, his connection to the team is subject to termination. And I think that is just so well said. And
It does bother me when people say that, because I think it gives people a false sense of connection and a false sense of hope, right? Mm-hmm. When you say, oh, we're family, no, you're not family, because at some point, if you don't deliver, I'm probably going to have to fire you. No matter what my children do, I'm not firing them from my family. They are they're unconditionally in family. Now, there could be estrangement, there can be whatever can happen within families, but that doesn't change the bonds of family. You're not firing someone from your family, and I think it creates an unhealthy environment. Now, listen. To say I will treat you like family, to say I will, I'm going to respect you, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to make sure that you have what you need in order to be able to perform well. I'm going to treat you fairly. All of those things, you can have elements of what it is to be in a family in your culture, but I think it's misleading to say to somebody on your team, we are family, because it is absolutely not the case. Because in saying that, you're basically saying, all right, you've got a job for life. No, of course not, right? You have certain standards you have to live up to in order to remain part of this organization.
Yep, I agree 100%. And when I always like to talk about it or think about it, I use football as the analogy, and I say we're a team. We're not a family. You could get traded. You could leave to go somewhere else. But while you're on my team, I'm going to block for you. I'm going to work out with you. I'm going to train with you. I'm going to do everything I can to make you the best, so that our team is the best. But
right, absolutely.
But that's kind of the analogy that I like to use. I'll block for you.
I think that's a great way to think of it. Yes, that is a great way to think of it.
But I think that's really important. And so about fighting well and managing conflict, what are some tips that a leader can do to help, I wouldn't say encourage conflict, but make sure that the conflict that is there, people are not afraid to express it, and it makes it a fair playing field whenever you have conflict?
Oh, I'll say encourage conflict. You may not want to, but I will, because listen, the reality is healthy teams fight. They fight a lot. I had a leader come to me once and say, oh, we're about the healthiest team you'll ever see. We never fight. I'm like, what do you mean? You were the most dysfunctional team I've ever encountered, because all of that conflict was just being pushed beneath the surface, right? People were passively aggressively taking things out on other people because they didn't feel like there was freedom within the culture to speak their mind. If there's a lack of conflict on your team, it means A, people don't care about the work enough to really speak their mind. B, there's a lack of accountability, so nobody understands what they're responsible for, and so therefore they're not speaking their mind because they don't know if it's their place to speak their mind. Or C, there's so much hidden angst and frustration and tension on your team that people are finding remedy for that angst and tension in other places that are unhealthy. So if your team never argues, never fights, then it's a problem. Because if you've hired talented, high-functioning people, conflict is a natural result of having those people around. Those people are going to fight. Now, there are a couple of qualifiers to that. You need to fight over ideas, not over personality. Right? Fights are not personal. Conflict is not personal. I disagree with your idea is different from, and those are ugly shoes. The moment it gets personal, everybody loses. So you have to fight over ideas and not personality. So if you as a leader start to sense that the conflict is becoming personal, you need to step in and say, hold on, time out. We need to step back and talk about this in a different way. The second thing is you always need to make sure that everybody is trying to find the merits in the other person's argument from the start before they just seek to destroy. That's really important as well, because even though we live in a culture that likes to engage in a scorched earth methodology where, there is no common ground between us, right? It's me versus you, and I'm going to destroy you. That's not a healthy way to have a conflict. So you need to make sure you begin by having each person articulate, here's what I like about your argument and what I like about your idea, and here's where I feel like it goes off the rails. And then the third thing is make sure you're arguing about the same problem. This is a common thing. Sometimes people argue not because they really disagree, but because they disagree about what is even being argued about. Let's make sure that we're actually having the same conversation before we engage in a conflict. So if you follow those principles, your team will have conflict in a healthy way, and you'll be able to resolve it as a leader in a healthy way. And so your job as a leader is to basically play moderator. You're the chief discerner, and you're listening for areas where, hey, that's getting personal. Time out. Let's step back. B, hey, we're arguing about different things here. Let's clarify what we're actually arguing about. Or C, you seem to be taking a dig my heels in position here, and you're not even willing to concede that anything about the other person's idea is accurate or correct or agreeable. What do you like about the other person's idea? If you as a leader play that role, then your team is going to have healthier conflicts. In the end, it's going to sharpen your team. You're going to do better work.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I've seen several times where those factors came into play where you are having an argument or a disagreement about something, and it turns out you actually are both arguing the same point. You're just doing it at different paths along the road, on different steps, and it's kind of like, oh, we're talking about two different things here. Let's get together, and but yeah, those are really great tips on how to have conflict. So if you're the leader and your team is having some disagreements and conflict, and it does start to get personal, and you have to step in, how do you build that relationship back up between those folks?
Well, that's a really difficult thing. Here's one thing I just want to give people permission to understand and embrace is that this is going to seem a little controversial. You don't have to like everyone you work with. You don't. As a matter of fact, there have been a lot of people I've worked with. I shouldn't even be saying this. There are a lot of people I've worked with that I didn't necessarily personally like, but I had to respect them, and I had to treat them as equals, and I had to listen to them, and I had to act with compassion toward them, and I had to act fairly toward them. I had to do all of those things, even if I didn't necessarily personally click with them. Mm-hmm. So, I want leaders to feel permission to not like everyone on their team, and also give people permission on their team to not like everyone that they work with. But your job is to listen with discernment and to make sure that people are treating one another with respect, that they're abiding by the culture that you've established, that they're not allowing any invisible rules or other types of narratives to guide their behavior, but instead that they're following the cultural edicts that you've established in terms of how they handle conflict, and then in terms of how they collaborate with one another. So as long as you do that, I think that you're going to create a culture in which people feel a sense of responsibility to the culture and to the organization and to you as a leader. And this is one thing I've heard from people over and over and over again. Like, people don't typically quit organizations; they quit managers. People, I very rarely hear somebody leave a company and say, this company just doesn't get me. Usually it's because the manager was a really bad manager, and they were just like, I can't take this anymore. There's no path forward for me. This team is a mess. I'm out of here, right? And so if you're creating an environment in which people have clarity of action, in which people understand that you have a high bar for them, but that you have compassion for them as well, and that you're there to help them succeed, and where you are certain that you're stepping in and making sure that people are treating one another with respect, then it's hard to get too far off the rails, John. Now, you're going to make some bad hires, and you might have to let some people go, and that is never fun when you have to do that. But as long as you're acting consistently with the values that you espouse, and you're demanding that other people do the same thing, then it's pretty hard to get too far off the rails. Yeah,
that's really good. I want to be conscious of your time. I was wondering if there's anything else that you want to talk about when it comes to leadership that a new leader, new manager should be thinking about that they're not typically taught when they become a manager.
Yeah, I would say, the parts of you that are the rough edges, the things that you value that other people don't understand, the things that are a part of how you see the world and the things that you care about. It's really easy to lose those things when you step into a leadership role in an organization. And I've known many people who have basically over time become subsumed into the organization to the point that they begin to morph and change so that they are essentially just an arm of the organization. It's hard to tell the difference between them and the organization. You have to keep those rough edges, and you have to have a framework for making decisions that is consistent with your character, consistent with your worldview, and consistent with the kind of body of work that you want to build in the world. And so my encouragement to leaders is you have to understand when you're going to have to say no. You're going to have to understand when you're going to walk away from your role in your organization. My friend Ricardo Crespo often says you can't lie to the man in the mirror, right? And if it gets to the point where you are being asked to do things that you feel like are not in the best interest of your team or the organization, or are in some way compromising some personal value that you hold, you have to draw those lines in the sand and say, if this happens, I will leave my role. If this happens, I will stand up to my manager. If your team sees you doing that, you're going to earn credibility and respect from them. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose all credibility and trust for your team. If they don't see that you're willing to make difficult decisions in the face of the pressure to compromise, you're going to lose their trust. So you have to know what you stand for. You have to understand what your guiding principles are, and you have to stand firm in them. And if you do that, then you're going to earn trust from your team and everyone around you. But by the way, many people may never see the difficult decisions that you make or the ways in which you stand up, because some of those things are going to be invisible to the team, but they matter. They matter. They build a foundation of trust, and they build a foundation of trust for you with yourself. It's important that you trust yourself as a leader as well, and that you trust that there are some guiding principles that are leading you as you strive to lead your team.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points that I want to agree with you on. This is trust yourself. That's one of the hardest things that I had to do, was to get over that imposter syndrome and actually trust that I was making the right decisions as a leader. And then I think you mentioned it in your book. You talk about how if you violate your team's trust just once, it's almost impossible to get that back.
Yeah, that's right. And most leaders don't blow it in small ways. I mean, most leaders aren't overtly lying to their team. They're not, willfully like embezzling money or something. I mean, most leaders don't blow trust in the big ways. They blow it in the small ways. It's little promises we make that we can't keep. It's, it's ways that we respond to something that are out of character with who we want to be. All of those kinds of things are the ways that we actually blow trust. And those little compromises of trust play out in big ways later. So we have to be very careful as a leader, because it's not going to be the big things that cause us to lose the team's trust. It's going to be little promises we make that we don't keep, things like that. So we can't declare undeclarables. We shouldn't be playing a superhero. We need to make sure we're not using people for our own personal ends, even in small ways, because all of those things add up to a giant breach of trust in the end.
Yeah, that's really good. So, Todd, how can people find out more about your book, Herding Tigers, and your podcast and other things that you're involved with?
So the book is available wherever books are sold. So just check out, if you Google Herding Tigers, you'll find it. And you can find me at toddhenry.com. That's my personal site, or accidentalcreative.com. That's my company site. And we do podcasts, a couple podcasts a week. We've been doing it for 13 years. So put out tons of content there, as well as you can find all my books in any of those places.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate having you on.
Thanks, John.